Yes, sir. We have a presentation, Mr. De Niro and Ms. Jan Bush, for the discussion of the current city retiree benefit policy benefit consideration, including the $500 monthly cap on retiree health care.
Thank you, Scott. Mayor, council members, good evening. Joe De Niro, Human Resources Director for the city. I'd like you to welcome Jan Bush, who benefits consultant with Robinson Bush. Jan has worked with the city in linking our coverages, primarily Medicare coverages, and our retirees to coverages over the years. She's very familiar with our plan design. She's also participated in some of our meetings with retirees. So I'm going to let her take the lead. We're going to go through. There we go. We've got a PowerPoint presentation, some information. I'll turn it over to Jan at this point.
Thanks, Joe. Good evening. Thank you for having me here this evening.
Good evening, and thank you for coming. Good to see you again.
Pleasure to be here. So this evening we're going to talk about the retiree health plan and the policy relative to the subsidy. So we're going to first review what the subsidy policy is in place today. We're also going to review the Florida statute that is the requirement for you as a municipality in the state of Florida to continue offering retiree coverage at a cost no greater than what an active employee would pay for their coverage. We're also going to give a brief update on the self-funded, partially self-funded health plan, the financial status over the last couple of years and what's projected to occur in this year and the following year. We're going to talk about what options retirees have today. And then Joe conducted a retiree town hall meeting on April the 6th, and we'll go through a couple of the key points that happened at that particular event. Then we're going to talk about what options as a council you have to consider for the retiree policy for the subsidy going forward, and then talk about what the next steps are going forward. So this next slide is the current subsidy policy, and it's broken into 4 buckets, if you will, and it's based on when you were hired and when you retired. So the very top group, or these are your employees that were hired before October 1st of 2003, and they retired before April 4th of 2014. In the next column, these are the number of individuals that fall into this particular bucket. Next to that is what that benefit is. So for that first group, you've got 165 Medicare-eligible retirees and 88 non-Medicare retirees for a total of 253. Now those 88 non-Medicairs are the ones that are really more or less going to be impacted by the policy decision that gets made today, because these are individuals that their benefit is 100% of the employee-only premium for the health plan, not to exceed the $500 cap that's under consideration tonight. The next group is a group that was hired before 10/1 of 03 and retired before April 4th, but they weren't really normal retirement age, so they were incentivized through this 75% premium benefit, not to exceed $500 to take an early retirement. The next, these are the employees that were hired before 10/1 of 03 and they retired after April 4th of 2014. Of that group, there are 109 of those. 20 are non-Medicare and 3 are Medicare eligible today. They have a benefit of 50% of the premium or $8 per year of service, whichever is greater. Again, not to exceed the $500 cap. And then this last group, these are the folks that are hired after 10/1/03 and they retire after that period of time. So that group has a benefit of $8 per year of service, not to exceed $200 a month. So that's the policy that's in place today. This is what's reflected in your GASB and your other post-employment benefit reports, et cetera. The next page is the Florida statute, and again, we won't spend a lot of time on this, but it just, in essence, says that as a municipality, you will continue to cover retirees once they go into retirement. You can charge them the full premium, you can subsidize the premium, it's up to you, and you have 2 categories. You have the non-Medicare eligible, where your active plan is their plan, and that's their primary plan. And then once they become eligible for Medicare, the statute allows you to rate them separately, so you can handle them a little bit differently than your non-Medicare retirees. So for that group, we now have different plan options. This next slide is just a quick depiction of what's going on with your partially self-funded health plan. So we're looking at your fiscal years that ended in 2015 and 16. So those years are done. So these are actual numbers. So if you look at the 2015 plan year, your income or your premium revenue for that year was about $5.59 million. And you can see that your expenses were almost $6.6 million. So that plan year, the self-funded plan incurred a loss of a little over $2 million. And at the bottom, you can see that is the monthly contribution that the city was making towards that plan, so $364.07. The following year, the 2016 ending fiscal year, the income went up to 4.7. Your expenses stayed up in that $6.5 million range and lost $1.7 million in that particular year. And the city put some extra revenue, some extra funds into the plan to help offset that deficit. So you adjusted that loss from a $1.7 million loss to a $38,000 loss in that year. So now we get to this year that we're in today and what's projected to happen today. So we're looking at a little over almost $5.1 million in revenue this year. Your expenses have stayed pretty high. You've had some very unfortunate catastrophic claims in these last few years, and those can really have a big impact on the plan. So you're expected to lose $1.2 million this year, and there's a budgeted transfer that's going to occur of $1.2 million that'll make that more or less break even for this year. The projections for next year, and again, we're looking at potentially in the budget, there'll be more discussions about this, a 15% increase to take that monthly contribution to $553, and that's where we are piercing that $500 monthly subsidy cap that's in place. But we are projected to have a loss again of $850,000, almost $851,000, even with the 15% increase in the premium. So there'll be further discussions and testimony and discussions about that as you talk about the budget. These are the options that your retirees have when they leave the city. So for, again, your non-Medicare eligible retirees, they stay on your active plan, the Cigna plan. The current monthly rate for that is $482. You can see the plan design. There's a $500 deductible, and then the plan design there. Once you age into Medicare, you become 65 or age into the Medicare, you have two different options. We have a supplement plan through Cigna, that's Plan N, with also a prescription drug plan, a comprehensive prescription drug plan. That's the plan that's similar to the plan that you have for your active employees. The other plan is Medicare Advantage plan through Aetna. The premium on a monthly basis for that plan is $305. And again, you can see with the supplement plan, the Plan N, Medicare's primary. With the Aetna plan, you're assigning your benefits to Aetna, and then that becomes your health plan, the Aetna network, et cetera. So those are the options that are currently in place. Joe and the team had a town hall meeting I mentioned on April the 6th, and it was well attended from your retirees, both Medicare and non-Medicare. The CEO of Parish Medical Center was invited to come in, and there was some discussion in several of the meetings about the clinic and how popular that is for Medicare eligible retirees, and is there an opportunity for those retirees to use the clinic. And Parish has indicated that that's not an option for those individuals, but they did bring several geriatric physicians to be introduced to the retiree group that would be very welcoming to your retirees to utilize their healthcare services. And then again, a lot of discussion on the $500 cap, and that's certainly something that the retirees are very interested in having conversation about. And here are the options that the staff has come up with in terms of looking at option one: keep the $500 cap and charge the cost of the premium on top of that. So we have those 88 people today that would be paying $53 a month for their health insurance if you choose option one. Option two would be to keep the cap in place, but look at it each year based on your budgets and the financial conditions of the city and whether the city would want to absorb that. Now we have 88 people at $53 a month would be about a $56,000 annual impact to the city to absorb that if you decided to do option 2 or option 3, which is to rescind the cap altogether and just cover the retiree premium at 100%. So tonight and the next steps is seeking your direction on what you would like to do with the subsidy policy, following up on the health plan budget for 2018, so there'll be more conversations after tonight about that. We are waiting for renewals from Aetna and Cigna, Medicare Advantage and Medicare Supplement and the prescription drug plans for 2018. They tend to be a little bit later. Hopefully we'll have them middle of the month, next month, so we'll be able to analyze that and see how that is going to impact the Medicare eligible retirees, and then come back to you with recommendations on what direction the staff is recommending to go with the renewals for 2018, and then continue to have that dialogue with the retirees about their options and their concerns and have those addressed as well. So with that, we'll open it up for questions.
Any questions from council? Go right ahead.
This is somewhat morbid, but life expectancy is what?
Well, it's starting to go down a little bit more these days, but it's in the 70s, 74.
74? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Where did you get the number for 88 non-Medicare? Was that just provided by the staff?
Yes,
Of how many people are?
Yes, so they ran a census to look at the current retirees and where they are with their dates of birth and where they would fall on.
So if we have more people that are using it, they're just choosing to use what the city's providing versus Medicare? Is that correct?
Once they age into Medicare, that becomes their option to move into the
I just thought we had a
Cigna
higher number. That's where I wasn't sure where the 88 was coming from.
Those are non-Medicare eligible.
Okay.
So they will be aging into Medicare, hopefully. They will eventually get to Medicare age, and Medicare will become their primary insurance, and they'll either have the Cigna or the Aetna option, but not the self-funded plan option.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Slide. I don't know if it's still.
City Manager, do you have anything you want to add at this point?
No, sir.
City Clerk, would you call the cards, please?
The first card is Kathy Mosley.
While Kathy's coming up, there is one other possibility we can do, if you'd like. Instead of everybody talking and often saying the same things, if you have a certain amount of people that you would like to speak, we can give them more time when they come up. So, but you can make that decision whenever you'd like. Kathy.
Good evening, Mayor, City
Nice
Council.
to see you.
My name is Kathy Mosley. I'm a retiree from the city of Titusville, and I am not a resident of your city, but I have a Titusville address. I'm here tonight to talk to City Council about rescinding the $500 cap that was placed on in 2014 on those employees. My only concern are for those employees who were hired prior to 2003 and retired prior to April 4th of 2014. Those two groups were the ones that had no indication at all that the city was going to change its policy concerning capping insurance. The city got what it needed when they offered early retirement back in the mid-90s. They got their savings from their salary. That's why they offered it. The employees got what they thought would be a good deal for them, which was free insurance for life. The same policy was in effect all the way up until 2003 when they started making modifications to it and changing the formulatic way that they were going to calculate it. The $500 cap, I have to say, is onerous, especially for those employees who have not reached Medicare eligibility yet. General employees and blue-collar employees have no COLA with their pension, so there is no increase. 2 years ago, in 2014, I think it was, or coming into 2015, I think the eligible cost was $411 for employees. It's now projected to be $551. That's in 2 years. So I can tell you, I retired in 2008. I looked at what the consumer price indexing since that point, and it was at about 17%. So I'm already at a 17% deficit, and I have retired less than 10 years. I asked Council's consideration that that cap be rescinded, especially since it was placed when
You have about 30 seconds.
especially since when the prior council asked what were the criteria that was used for this cap, and the personnel director at that time said there was none. So if there was no criteria to be placing it or putting it at $500, then remove the cap. If there's, if you didn't have a reason for it, take it off, because it is truly impacting. We are self-regulating. Thank you.
Thank you. Call the next card, please.
Steve Bridges.
Steve Bridges, City of Titusville. Well, here we are again. I'm trying to stay within the time, and hopefully I'll answer or give you some information that will preclude anybody else from coming. I don't know how much card she has, but we don't want to take up too much of your time. But as Kathy said, we are having it goal in mind.
Take all the time you need.
Well, we've been chasing this for about 3 years, previous council included. In fact, the previous council admitted they didn't understand the cap or its limits. We had a council meeting. I'm sure those two are here because they said, why do we have a $5 cap? And nobody could answer that question, even staff at the time. Now, maybe they have an answer now, I don't know. Here's some questions to consider about the cap. What research or data was used to implement any cap, much less $500? What research or data is being used to retain it? Why only retirees? We're down 20 retirees from just over a year ago. I didn't know if you noticed that or not. 1 year ago, this presentation was 273. Today, it's 253 is what I heard, right? And only 88 of us short-term are not Medicare eligible yet. When we retired, there was no mention of a cap. Why was it attempted to be negotiated with bargaining units, which we were not in and not represented by? Why was it done behind closed doors? And I say that because we weren't apprised of it, okay? I don't think most of you know that. And I'll leave that one off for a minute. But in 2014, we were told there was no cap. That was after the April memo that we ended up seeing. It appears this cap was implemented in an arbitrary and capricious manner. Only retirees. $500 cap and nobody can answer why. Behind closed doors with unknown intent. We have heard nothing about this policy cap that has met any merit and only puts a burden on a small group of people, 88 currently. I think it will affect more than that ultimately, because if it's a $500 cap, even the people paying half of their insurance are going to pay half of whatever the $553 is. Is that correct? Okay. And some retirees are going to have to make further sacrifices. We have a fixed income. There is no COLA for most of us. Some do still have that. And we're asking council to take some action and not just waive this cap, but temporarily, but eliminate it completely. Be glad to answer any questions you have, but...
Would you like more time? Okay.
You guys know, we've talked about this several times, individually and corporately, so. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Nelson?
I don't have a question for Mr. Bridges, but I do have one for Joe. Where did the cap come from?
Good question. The city was
easy now.
The city was attempting to sustain pensions and sustain benefits, medical expenses during the time that we were going through some really challenging times.
Okay.
The city was going through some very tough times and trying to meet expenses, sustain, like I said, pension as well as health care. we've been recovering over time with our health care contributions. We took the contribution from a high of $490 per member per month to about $364 per member per month. And as you saw in one of the charts, that we're slowly recovering from that time when we took the contribution down. And as we took the contribution down, we were building up some surpluses in our health care claim. And that allowed the city to continue to offer health care, but not take those funds from the general fund to contribute. So we were able to take that cost down to that level, and now we're recovering. We also had some other challenges, and that was through pension reform. And we went through the changes of pension reform, trying to sustain that benefit, which occurred a few years ago, 2013, 2014. At that time, while the city was faced with these challenges of health care costs and pensions, the health care contribution was at that $364 per member per month. So as we began to think about, sustaining the benefit, continuing with the benefit, being able to sustain it, is how can maybe impose some type of a cap or develop some threshold so that those costs wouldn't continue to escalate. So as staff, as we talked about this, we developed a cap of $500. Now, that was the best estimate that we had at the time, thinking, it's going to be a while before we go from $364 per member per month to $500. Well, we are there. And we got there, at a quite, quick pace. We didn't look at, actuarial studies and do, those cost benefit now. We did the best that we thought we could do at the time to develop this threshold.
Okay.
And that's how we got to it.
When was that? When did the cap
2000 and when we did the changes in pension, 2013, 2014 around, I'd have to go back specifically and look at when that policy was implemented.
So somewhere in 2013, 2014.
It was about the same time we developed the changes to our pension plan, about that 2014, and was incorporated also into the collective bargaining agreements, where it specifically stated that the health care premium would not exceed that $500. Yes, ma'am.
So at that point, the health care costs continue to go up.
Yes, ma'am.
But on the other hand, the amount of people who are benefiting from it are going down.
Yeah, that top tier is that threshold that is frozen, if you will.
Right.
That group will never get any larger, if that's what you're referring to.
Well, it will get smaller.
Yes.
Correct. And I don't.
It has. Yes, ma'am.
So from last year to this year, how many people have we lost out of that?
It's about, if my recollection is about 5 or 6 that where we have lost those members. Yes, ma'am. It's actually gotten smaller.
I saw 20 on this. So.
Please.
Okay.
I don't.
So a fair number. Okay. And I was just sort of curious because it seems like most of the people that are on this list are 57 to 64. That's your majority. And those people are going to become Medicare
eligible. Yes,
eligible within the next
That's
couple of
correct.
years. Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. Just trying to catch up.
Right. And one of the strategies that we had in place was to develop a plan that would offer a very comparable plan that we have now to the Medicare eligibles, but not cost as much as the active plan cost at the time. And that's why now we've gone to a fully insured product for our Medicare eligible. So that gap to the $500 is a lot larger than it is for the active members.
Okay. Okay, I think I got it. Thank you.
Member Diesel?
So till 13-14, there was no cap.
Prior to that, no, you're correct. Prior to, yes.
And in 13-14, we came up with a $500 cap.
That's correct.
And I don't know that we're going to be able to get to the explanation, but do we know where the $500 came from mathematically and statistically?
And again, like I said, Mr. Diesel, staff, through our negotiations, if you will, our pension reform, we just developed that cap internally. Did we have any actuarial study? Did we do any research to come up with that? No, sir.
Then what the biggest thing for me right now, from where I come from, is how did that cap become approved? Did you say it was union negotiated?
We used it in negotiations. It is referred to in the collective bargaining agreement. It became a policy, the city policy.
I guess what I'm really getting to is before 13-14 there was no cap. 13-14 there's a $500 cap. I wasn't here. I wasn't involved in the middle of that. I need to know what say they had. I need to know what approval was sought from them. I just need to know that they had a say and it wasn't just put at them and say, here you go, this is it, good luck.
It was a city policy that was put in place.
It was put in place.
Yes, sir.
At one point you said it was negotiated.
Well, it was negotiated because with the unions, I'm not talking about the retiree group, or the cap was negotiated with the unions from the standpoint that the members of the unions were going to be retirees at some point. So, you know, the unions don't represent the
I get that, but right now they're the ones who are going to be affected.
That's good.
I need to know what kind of say they have on what affects them.
Well,
all right, thank you.
Okay, next card, please, clerk.
Chris McGraw.
Good evening. I'm Christine McGraw. I retired in 2016, a 31-year employee. So I was in the deferred retirement program in April of 2014 when the change for the 50% and the $500 cap. But because I was already considered retired, my choice was stay in the drop, accept the 50% in the cap, or leave the drop and get the full payment. So my husband and I discussed it, and we decided together that I should stay in the drop. So that's why I retired in 2016. So the reality is this. In 2016, my premium was $153 a month. In 2017, it went to $233, an $80 a month increase in 1 year. And in the 2018 proposal, I'm a 50% plus then the 53. It will go to $303. So in 2 years, that premium has risen 98%. And so I'm here for those people in the gap that aren't quite Medicare but have decided to retire under. And the reality of this is that a 98% increase in 2 years, anyone would say to themselves, what? If your health insurance went up, your life insurance went up, your car insurance went up 98% in 2 years, you wouldn't just sit there and say, well, that's the breaks. Life moves on. And so that's why I'm here to say I'm a real person. This has affected my budget. I have a fixed income, and that just seems exorbitant and excessive. So my request is also to lift the cap. I know economic reality, and I know that making a contribution is fair as a retiree. But boy, when you put those hard dollars of the over 500, those are real hard dollars. A percentage just is a piece of the cost. And so that would be my request of council to consider, removing the cap and just leaving a percentage, and then it goes as it goes. And I appreciate your time.
Any other questions? Yes.
I just wanted to say I understand. I have a $250 contribution to the insurance, and it is going up.
Yeah.
I don't know that the city can turn around and satisfy everybody.
No, I agree. I know
gonna-
it's an economic question, but boy,
I know.
From a retiree point of view, 98% in 2 years, is it going to be another 98% in 4 years? We live on a confined, limited dollars, and as others do.
Yeah.
And so it just is an impact that wasn't quite anticipated, and I feel like you have the authority to try and help us out with that. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question, Mr. De Niro. Can you explain how that is determined each year, the increase?
The contribution that the city would contribute towards health care? Well, we take a look at...
Well, I'm talking about why does it go up in these periods of time?
Well, as I explained earlier, we're recovering from that low... We took our contribution from a high of $490 per member per month to $364. And that was during the tough economic times that we're having. Now we're beginning to recover from that $364, and you show on the slide. And Chris is right. We've gone from $364 to $480 to now we're slowly approaching.
I don't think you're understanding my question. Is that an arbitrary amount, or is it based on something that's happening to the insurance policy?
We take into account what we anticipate our losses are over the year. We have an actuary that helps us determine, what those losses are, what our contributions are, and we take that into consideration and what we can afford through the budget process. That's how we get to where we are, and we've had some really tough years of losses and claims over the last year. This last year we've had 3 claims over 1.3 million, and those are unexpected. But we had to prepare for that, and sometimes you just can't budget, for what some of the catastrophic events. So there is an organized process that we use to arrive at the contribution.
So it's based on what the insurance is doing?
Well, again, it's based on what we anticipate our claims are going to be. We have a process. We work with our actuary to determine what our losses were previously and what we anticipate those losses are going to be in the future. And we come up with a contribution. The other part of that is to incrementally adjust it, and that's how we went through our budget over the last couple years. Instead of taking big jumps of contributions, we tried to hit incrementally so we're not affecting our employees with those drastic increases of health care. So there is a process that we're using to arrive at that.
Well, they're going up.
They are.
Appreciably.
Yes, sir.
The numbers that were just given aren't small incremental amounts. So they are determined by what's happening in the real world. Is that the case or not?
So it's your projected claims cost plus the administration of your plan. So you look at these are the total expenses that we believe are going to occur next year. And based on all the revenue sources, whether it's from the employees, from the city, from the retirees, this is how much money it's going to generate. Now, when you look at that, you're looking at the plan design that you have today. And the plan design that you have today is generating a certain amount of loss or expense that you need to cover with your revenue sources. So, as part of the budget process, I think there are some considerations about plan design. If you change your plan design, you reduce your expenses. So that's not always popular either, where you're looking at, do we need to increase a deductible or add a copayment or change the out-of-pocket maximums, or, so you can reduce your expenses by looking at plan design changes, which means you're basically shifting the cost to the users of the plan. So people that never use health care don't really feel it, but if you use a lot of health care, then you actually do feel that impact, but you don't need as much revenue to cover those expected costs. So a lot of my clients have to do a combination of contribution changes as well as plan design changes to be able to meet their budgetary constraints that they may have. So that's also, I think, as part of the budget process, a part of that process is looking at your plan design and how can you try to mitigate some of those costs in certain areas. And obviously hospital costs and healthcare costs in general are continuing to go up. So unfortunately, you kind of have that dilemma of, do you just keep putting money in the plan, or do you try to mitigate those costs through plan design, or both?
Thank you. Was that a number?
Please.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Just to make sure I have this clear, I understand that we are partially self-insured, correct?
Correct.
So at what point does the insurance that we have kick in? Is it you have an illness and it costs $1,000, right. You have an illness that costs $5,000? Right. At what point does that kick in?
Yeah, the city purchases reinsurance.
Okay.
To cover those and protect the city against those catastrophic events that you're referring to. That deductible right now is $135,000 per event. The city also sets aside another $110,000 for pooling. So before the reinsurance kicks in or is reimburses per claim, that $135,000 plus the $110,000 one-time pooling charge has to be satisfied. And then any amount of claim or expense beyond that is reimbursed to the city. That's the protection that the city has in place against some catastrophic losses. And we have 3 right now and about 8 that we had over the prior year that went through that deductible.
And when you speak of pooling, can you explain it a little better?
Pooling is just another way of incurring some of the losses to keep your reinsurance rates low. So in addition to the deductible, the pooling is just a one-time event that is satisfied before the reinsurance is triggered. And this is kind of an adjustment, and Jan can kind of help us out with that. It's an adjustment that you bet against your claims that are hopefully not going to go above that threshold and keep your reinsurance costs lower.
Okay, wait a minute.
So,
Jan, can you explain that, please?
Sure. So the pooling part of it is that, so you have an individual deductible. So if you had a claim of $130,000, and there were 5 other people that had claims of over $130,000, you can pull those claims dollars above the $130,000 to achieve the $110,000. So it doesn't have to be one person, it could be multiple people, or it could be one person that pierces through that $130,000 deductible. So if you only had one person, you would have a $240,000 deductible for that one person. You could have a bunch of people that went over 130, and whatever dollars go over the 130 will all be pulled together to achieve the $110,000 pooling deductible that Joe was talking about. And then any individual after that goes over the 130,000 will immediately be a reimbursable claim.
So the money that we are actually spending is up to that $135 million, correct?
$130,000.
$135,000. Okay, excuse me. $135,000.
Yes.
For everybody.
So any individual. So it could be you, it could be your child, it could be your spouse. Any individual on the plan is protected from those catastrophic claims costs that exceed $135,000.
Okay.
The city's protected.
I got it.
Right. The city is protected from that. So, yeah, so that is your reinsurance protection for that.
Okay. Okay. I think I have it. Thank you.
Okay, next card, please, clerk.
Jim Thomas.
Say,
Good evening. It's Jim Thomas, city employee. Made both of my bosses aware that I would come up here and speak out of respect for them because I am a city employee. I'm also a long-term resident of Titusville. I was born here, as was my wife. I should retrace that. There was no hospital then, but we were born here. That aside, I'm kind of in the same boat as Chris, but I would say even worse. And just so I don't upset anybody, I'm totally for this, raising this $500 cap. It was something that was promised to us a long time ago, in some cases 20, 30 years ago. And you worked here right till the time when you could get that. In my case, if I would have left, I was 100% vested. I could have left and had the $500 cap and the lift if it happens, but I didn't get that. And what wasn't talked about, what Chris did not talk about, she talked about percentages, et cetera. There's people in that 250 cap that are actually older than some of the retirees. They're not only older, they have more years of service. Like you just heard, Chris has 31 years of service. That's a lot of service. And we are already paying above the cap because we're at 250. And in my case, it's much worse because I was 1 year from the drop program. I think the drop program works for the city and for the employee. All that money's gone. I didn't get that. But I continue to work with my experience here at the city. So I'm working for that. Also, I bought 7 years of service here on top of my 20. That money was frozen by the city. They have the money in the pension program. They use it for their obligation. But the money that was on my side of the equation, it's frozen. It's dead to me. I get nothing out of that now. So that's absurd. And I could go into that, but that's not what we're talking about, health care. That is a legitimate fact there.
It's not really germane to this.
I'm sorry?
I don't think it's germane to this. You're correct.
Yeah. So I'm just saying. So there, if you're looking, if you're feeling concerned about what's happened to people, I'm saying it's happened to the people at the 250 cap also, and sometimes in worse fashion. And that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Next card, please.
Jackson Holder. Oh, under new business. That's the last card.
Okay. So you're looking at a different item then, is that correct? Okay. All right, well, we've heard what everybody has to say. Is there anything else that staff would like to put on this? No? Okay. We basically have three options here. What's your pleasure? Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Thank you. And if council, number one, thank you for the information and presentation. The others, thanks to each person that spoke on this. And I think most importantly, thanks to everybody who's been engaged in this issue year over year over year. And I'll share with some council, and Mary, you have been the longest and have a large frame of reference for this. So one is a frame of reference for myself. Prior to arriving at council, one of the things I believe to be critically important was that as the challenges that the city was facing, like all of America was facing, due to economic downturns, exacerbated on the Space Coast by closing of this and closing of that, money went away and decisions were made to try to allow the city to be as fiscally responsible as it could. And of those decisions that were being made, I was in disagreement with some of them. Although I understand why people would go to there, I didn't agree with it. And it's part of why I hope to serve on council. And at that point, somewhere in between pension reforms and furloughs and health benefits and so forth and so on, there were a whole lot of measures that were taken, and it's arguable on the backs of the employees at the time and on the backs of those who had served previously. It is what it is. And the folks in this room have had to live with that decision or those decisions along that way, and the cities had to live with the decisions along the way. I'm grateful that folks have continued to bring this forth to the city, to not let council forget that it was important as far as the commitments that were made to the folks in this room, the commitment we have to the integrity of the city. So I'd offer two things, or a couple things, I guess. One is that in our continuing health care costs, I think one of the things that we've run into is that when you look at our expenses, at the end of the day, I see the raise in them, but if you look at 15, we're at 6.6. You look at 2016, we're at 6.5. And you look at 2017, projected 6.3, and 2018, catastrophic year at 6.9. What that shows me is that we're generally around 6 or 7. I mean, that's it. So whereas we discussed it, I think, and I just share with you, and sometimes when I hear discussion about this, you know, the takeaway is I get it's a rocket cliff up, or it's a rocket cliff up and down and up and down. And make no mistake that a variance between $1 million is $1 million. I think that as a city in planning, I think it's safe to say that if we adjusted our expenses, our anticipated expenses, from 4.5 to 6, that if we adjusted from 6 to 7, probably about 7.4 right now, right, that we're going to meet the expenses. I'm saying from an anticipated cost, I don't think it is horribly bad to go, you know, most likely next year we're going to pay $7 million for medical care. And I think that that's step one, because it helps us acknowledge what is a fact, which has been proven year over year over year over year. That's not, if we had planned for $7 million, at least we would know the number we're dealing with instead of trying to catch it up based off of market fluctuations and so forth and so on. I don't think we need to do that. I think that there's enough volatility in the market that we should over-prepare, put the money aside, and then God help us if we have money left over, we can reintroduce it back instead of going opposite. So I would say that that is step one, and we can do that through our budget cycle and just in direction as a council and going, this year, guys, instead of 4.5 or 6, it's going to cost 7, and that's just a fact of what it's going to be. The second is relative to the $500 cap, and anytime that there are some obligations that in rescinding the cap opens up liabilities to the city, right? And so the liability to OPEB, the liability, I mean, make no mistake that if they're in the same way that for every person in here who is paying more out of their pocket, and the same way that is a liability to you, the same reason it's a liability that was driven, that brought folks here because it hurts, right, is the same concern as a city you would have. And as a steward, you have to be cognizant of that, which makes it a hard decision. But here's some words I found, and I think it is helpful. First off, I was fortunate enough to have dinner last night with all people with Colonel McKnight last night. And for those of you not familiar, he's a colonel who was involved in Somalia and the Black Hawk Down, and he's an American hero. And there are 3 charges he left after speaking. One, take care of your veterans, right? We just had a Navy SEAL die overseas, and we're eating pie. Second was taking care of your first responders. And third is take care of teachers. That was his charge. Lifetime of experience, that was it. And so I look at the folks who are retirees in our room. A lot of them are first responders, and a lot of them dedicated their life in service. And I think that that's a common thread. And so I said, okay, well, that's pretty timely. That's pretty good. And then I really tried to think about it, and hopefully this helps with counsel. This is from Abraham Lincoln. It's paraphrased, but it says, "Neither let us be slandered from our duty by false accusations against us, nor frightened from it by menaces of destruction to the government, nor of dungeons to ourselves. Let us have faith that right makes might, and in that faith, let us, to the end, dare to do our duty as we understand it." Subsequent to that, he also had another quote. And it reads, "To care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow, and for his orphan." I think Abraham Lincoln's a smart guy. And so when I think of what is the right thing to do, the right idea is to take care of the folks that took care of us for a really long time. And so I think that we are dealing with something that inherently had good intent as a steward, and it may have been the decision that folks felt was right at the time, but the decision that's before us, I think we can make a right decision, which would be remove the cap. Definitively for the folks that retired before 14, I would remove it all the way. But for the folks by 14, they did not have an option. The deal was they committed a long time ago, and in the last couple of years, we say add this, and that wasn't the deal. You could argue that the folks after 14 had a chance to, you can do it or you don't. I can meet you halfway, although I say just get rid of it. I think it's our duty to take care of those folks, and that's where I'm at on it.
I'm going to jump in here for a moment, if you don't mind. Just for the record, I'm exactly in the same position that most of you are. I'm very sympathetic to what you're saying because of that. I understand your arguments and so forth. I'm a retiree, and I am of Medicare age, so that's where I'm at. While I appreciate what you said, the philosophical quotes and so forth, I'm a bit more pragmatic than that, because you don't just say, we'll make it up to $7 million and that'll take care of it. You have to understand that the city is on, it's not like the Congress. We don't have a deficit budget. We have a zero balance budget. In order to do something like that, we have to raise taxes. It doesn't come out of the air. It comes out of your taxes too. So you'll be paying for part of it, but so will the rest of the city. Now, I'm not saying that in any way, but to explain that that's real money, and it also affects what we have to put into the pot, so to speak, as time goes on. It's not as easy as let's just make another number here. I have to point that out. Member Diesel, I think you were next.
Oh, point of reference, and some of you have heard it. Certainly people with the staff have heard it. I just heard a very similar story to mine, and that at year 28 with I'll say Brevard Public Schools, but FRS, I'm on the 2-yard line, and they changed the drop program on me. Year 28. And for 28 years, and I know you get in a little bit of trouble when you say I was promised, but I felt like I was promised, and all the people before me were given the same promise, but their promise was kept. And at year 28, mine was changed. Now, there is still a drop, but it changed my life. It was a 6.3%. Now it's a 1.3%. That's clearly not the same. I jumped in a little bit early because I was scared it was going to go away. And as you may have been able to tell from my previous time, I don't like not having any say in that. I didn't like not having any say in that. And certainly in the city level, if I have any say about it, I think that the retirees should have some say. Now, when I get to one more year, because after this next school year, I will retire after 35 years. I won't get the same drop many people before me got, but I'll get something. But it also concerns me that when you become a retiree, you lose your voice. Not just sitting here, but overall. They don't negotiate. The police and fire negotiate. They're not part of the negotiation. I get that. And let me make it real clear, that's not your fault. And you got a very tough job, and I've said that over and over, but I'm still going to say how I feel about it too, and not everybody's going to like it in all kinds of angles. I realize there's a financial aspect to this. Obviously, that's the main thing we're talking about. Our presentation was so much more about finances than anything else. But I have some concerns about what was promised. I have some concerns about what was, at the very least, perceived for all the years that these people were working. So I have a concern, and I tend to lean towards doing something. I don't think I've been satisfied financially with the aspect. The numbers seem to show me that the number of people reliant on this may decrease. And it may. I heard a number previously that didn't match that number, but it was, I believe, 20 from last year. That should start, we got to weigh that in there too. And again, you're the expert on that. I am not. That's why you get to do the little testimony thing, and I get to talk about it. But that being said, I have some great concerns, and perhaps some of it is because I got to live through it, and I have to separate some things up here. I realize that. But I want to make it clear that there's a lot of people out there that were counting on us, and just like I was counting on the state. And I won't use the name, but, we got governors and people like that didn't ask us, and by golly, me and some police people and some fire people and other people, we lost a lot of stuff. And that being said, that concerns me. I want to make sure that the people this affects have a say. And outside of that, we got some decisions to make.
Member Nelson?
I think what bothers me about this is that these people retired, or some of these people retired, relying on no cap on their insurance, and then retroactive, all of a sudden they get this cap. And to me, that's not fair, because they took an act or did an act in reliance on it, and then we're turning around and saying, hey, you guys, we really didn't mean it. We had our fingers crossed behind our backs. I mean, that to me bothers me. And I have no problems with moving the cap, because the numbers of people involved are going down. So our costs may be going up, but our people are going down. And that's the way of life. So I'm pretty much in favor of removing the cap.
One of the issues we have is we don't know what's happening next year or the year after. And judging by the way Congress is handling things, it could be a catastrophic situation. I know that doesn't change what you said, but this is some of the thinking that's going into whether or not to have a cap, and I feel obligated to at least let you know that. You know that Congress, the House, has passed a new health situation, saying something new on the way, except the Senate has said we passed that, but we're going to go back and do it all over again because we don't like what you said in that we were just passing it for political reasons, I guess. So again, realize that it's a difficult time. We could see something next year that's good, or we could see something next year that's terrible. So, and we again have to, staff has to look at the budget in that reference. I have a lot of them now. Member Stokel?
Yep. I have a question for staff, actually. If we were to remove the cap, does this affect all of the categories of retirees? Or just the 88?
Well, if we can go back to that
slide
chart with the 4 groups.
Yeah, slide 3.
You want to look at that, for example. So
I think it's, slide that one.
okay. So if you go to the far right, maximum benefit, I think that's what you're referring to, is where the maximum benefit states not to exceed.
Right.
I think that's the challenge that we're dealing with.
Yeah, and I guess where I'm going with this with Member Nelson's comment, if we're losing people, so our cost would be going down, is the inverse going to happen where our cost is going to be going up because we now are paying more for these other people in these other categories as they start retiring?
Well,
you see what I'm saying?
Let me try and answer that. The top category, and I think you all have a chart where you see the aging of those non-Medicare eligible go to Medicare.
Right.
So that's one of the cost containment measures that we have in place, where the non-Medicare eligible group in that first group is eventually going to go away. They're going to move towards aging and go into that Medicare, which is a different cost containment strategy, if you will. So that group is, you're right, it's frozen. It's not going to get any bigger. It's going to get smaller. They're going to move into Medicare as they age. And we have another strategy in place to contain those costs, but offer a retiree benefit to that group. And the same occurs with, Tier 2 as well as Tier 3. They're ultimately going to become Medicare eligible.
That's what I'm asking. So if we were to remove the cap, it removes the cap on all of the tiers?
Except for the bottom.
Except for the bottom one.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then when you guys were determining this $500 cap, did you look at other cities to see what they were doing with their retirees at all?
That came afterwards. There are some communities that do have a $500 cap in place. There are other communities that do have certain thresholds. We were trying to model the threshold that occurs with that last group, where the city said, employees hired after 10 October of 2003 and retiring would, they would receive a subsidy of $8 for each year of credited service, not to exceed $200, and we try to model that kind of concept. So that's how we develop that 500, if you will, within our staff. I think we
Okay, and then I had another question. This may be for Jane. Is it possible to have where retirees could have an option where they have the $500 cap, or they could pick a different plan that would have a lower premium? Or does the city have to have one option for all retirees?
You could have another plan. You have to offer them the opportunity to continue a plan that the active employees have.
Okay.
So you could have a different plan that's capped at a lower cost basis, if you will, and make that the plan. So the answer to your question is yes, you could have other options if that's what you chose to do.
Okay.
That might be something you'd want to do with your active employees as well. Just I think as you start contemplating your options going forward, that you may have a base plan and then a buy-up plan potentially for as your strategy moving forward.
Okay. I think that's it. All right, thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. And to Member Diesel, to your point, as far as folks having a voice, I'm in agreement with that. As employees, there's collective bargaining, but as retirees, there isn't. So, to be fair to the effort that's been put into this, that these folks have been working on this and building for the past 3 years at a minimum what you see before you today. And so as they've continued to engage this issue, it hasn't been a sit idly by. And I think that there's more engagement relative with our retirees at this point than I don't know previous, but I can tell you, I know that there is opportunity to engage, right? And it's more than just what I've seen in the past. But the flip side is I would say that that's part of our charge as a council member, that they are the voice of the constituency specifically, and they are unique. And therefore, I think that's our charge, and what you have heard and what you have researched and what you have found and what you have listened to, that those discussions and being part of that process, that's why we're here, is hopefully to represent them in that process and arrive at a decision that is reflective of what individuals would hope for our community. So I just share that with you, not to discredit what folks have been engaged in previously, but also not to discredit the charge and task that we have before us. And to Member Stokel, regarding how do you go about it? Experience has taught me this. On any issue you got, there's about 7 different ways you can cut that pie. And the one thing is this idea of a cap, and then later on we'll talk about policies and this and that. So the next question is, you can look at different cost containment measures and it's going to be different policies and this and that. And the question you're going to ask is, well, can you get the same doctor? Can you get the same service? And, is it going to cost the same? At the root of it, if you can answer yes to all of those, and at the end of the day, it has been my experience that take them as two separate issues at this point, because I think that we can, through a commitment, I think as a city, we can commit to what I believe was intended, no matter how we translated it, whether we promised it, whether it was inferred, whether it was not. You got a lot of folks out here, specifically, not to discredit anybody else, but our law enforcement officers, their entire career is predicated on integrity. And so when they come and they say, this is what we believed, I got to go. That's it. And so I just share with you, I'm not interested in really shaving plans for, this or that, just to, whittle it down at this moment. And I'm not interested in passing along additional for cost containment on the backs of whatever. The challenge being, I think, is that how do we holistically look at eating, to the mayor's point, eating $1 million and some change? That is no small task, and where you come up with it. And this is where I think that we actually are in a very unique position to take on a big, nasty challenge, because we got a city manager who is a whip. I mean, what I mean by that is he is incredibly intelligent. He is versed in what he can do. And if he was less than who he is, I would be more reserved in how anxious I would be to say we can get this done. But I think that he can do it, because right now the city is on go, go, go mode. We are growing as a community. Our tax revenue base isn't there when you compare our median income per household. We're getting more houses, but they're just not as much. So we're seeing growth. So our taxes, our income's going to come in. But I think that we can, because of the leadership we have, find a way to balance all of the things that we're trying to do as a community to capture this moment of growth and still meet commitments and find a balance in there. And it is going to be a tight wire to figure out how to do it. But I believe that as far as an option. So.
Again, I'm going to just jump in. I also agree with you that we have a great city manager, but he's not a magician. And pulling rabbits out of the hat isn't part of his job description. There's only one place this money can come from, because we have been very frugal, and we're trying to catch up now with adding more people to keep up with the growth of the city, things that are coming in, construction, jobs, and so forth. It's got to come from raising taxes, and that's the rest of the citizens who aren't being heard from tonight. And again, I have a lot of sympathy for what you're saying, but there is another side to the story, and you've got to recognize that. Member Diesel.
Yeah, and it's clear. My focus here to begin with was the process. I wasn't here for the process, and I wanted to know the process, and I wanted to know what information was there. And I will say, yeah, very clearly, you guys have had meetings and you've deciphered information, and I think it's good that they got to hear what they heard. I just feel like somewhere along the line, as Vice Mayor said, we may need to be the voice. That being said, back to the numbers. What is the concern? And obviously, I know what the concern is, but give me some numbers, give me some ideas on the rescind. If we go rescind, what's the issue there? What kind of numbers are you talking there? And have you looked at that? Well, again, we know we have less people. We have more people getting ready to age into 65 in Medicare. We know that, and I don't know that you've calculated that. I'm sure you've calculated everything. So what is your calculation? I don't want to, obviously, I want to support where I can support, but I'm not going to go anywhere blindly. And as Mayor said, there's a whole other group out there that's not sitting here right now, and I want to hear a little bit from that side.
Well, okay, I'll take a stab at it. Jam can jump in. We know what the cost to the city is this year by removing that cap. We gave you that. I think there's a spreadsheet you all have in your packet that by removing that cap would cost the city $56,000, I think, is the total cost for this 1 year, and that's how we arrived at that number by computing the number of non-Medicare eligibles before they age into that Medicare. So, each year, there would be as the contributions go up, then we would, add to that cost. We don't know what it would be next year because we haven't determined what our contribution is yet. So we know what it would be for 2018. That's at $56,000.
So we don't know. So we don't know that it would go up necessarily. Again, we're still talking about numbers going down in the system.
Well, once we hit 553, which is what we intend that the contribution will go next year, I don't suspect we'll ever go below that. So we'll always be at that 553 because we have to pay for our claims. We have to set a contribution, to pay for our claims. We know that there may be less of a liability because that non-Medicare group will age into the Medicare group where the plan is a little less costly than the active plan, if I'm referring to that a little.
Yeah. So, your answer is question?
Go ahead. You have more?
Well, no, I was just going to refer to the, the breakdown of the 88 people are going to be staging in. So, they phase in based on the year of birth when they're going to become eligible. Now, we don't know who's going to be on the plan. There may be other considerations for them to not be on the plan any longer. And we don't know what the contribution structure is going to be. So if we are looking at the cost basis of the plan itself and we're reducing costs, it may not be as much. And it will be attrition. There will be people that are going to be leaving the plan. Right now, we know for the 88 people, it would be about $56,000 if all 88 of those people, are on the plan next year. But that's the maximum amount that there will ever be in that 100% category. And they'll be falling off 6 in the next year and 11 the year after that. So we can see how many will be coming off. If you assumed it was a $600 a year subsidy, roughly $53 a month, you could just kind of do the math, and based on however many you have that are still on that plan, you'll be subsidizing around $600 a year for each one of them, assuming that you stayed somewhere around that $53 rate. And if everything stabilizes, we have had some large claim activity, and that tends to be cyclical. So the hope is that some of that will stabilize, and we don't hit that $7 million projected cost next year. But it's, you have to plan for it, as you said, Vice Mayor. You really do have to plan for that. And the city's already putting in, with the 553, another 1.1 million. Plus, you can see there's a shortfall of 850,000. So that's a $2 million impact in next year that's going to have to be addressed one way or another.
But our number payout seems to be at this time kind of stabilized, and some more numbers will go down, and we don't have to worry about next year this doubling or tripling or something like that.
It's you hope not, but it's.
Well,
actuaries have the luxury of having a job that they're wrong 100% of the time. Because it's very difficult to predict on those. There's a science to it, but it's very difficult when you have large claim activity that you can't predict.
How often do we readdress this process?
So there's an annual requirement.
An annual requirement. So we could sit back here next year if we rescinded, and we could look to our friends over there and say, boy, we just had a disaster. You're going to help us out here. Of course, you won't be as happy. But, okay, I just needed to know that because I'm just not totally aware of that. And thank you for your answers.
City Attorney?
I had two comments. One was which you just addressed at this point. When I heard conversations of removing the cap, and there was also some talk about how things were done arbitrary and what numbers did you have. My advice is to council is if you're deciding to take action of a more permanent nature, removing a cap, I think it's wise to do your studies and find out what is that impact to the city. So you go into this understanding the consequences or potential consequences of that action. And what does it mean to the city in the future, whether you obtain actuarial studies, look at trends, analysis. life expectancy, all the things that as a council, we talked about being stewards of money. What is the impact on that action? That would be my advice. Second is there was a question about what groups are impacted if you remove a cap and the various groups. I can tell you legally you really cannot take any action that would impact bargaining unit employees without negotiation. You have retirees that are not in that bargaining unit, but some of these folks under these different caps are. So you need to be very careful because they are subject to the negotiation process. You can ask for city manager to explore options and to provide you information, but you really can't provide direction and make a decision regarding bargaining unit employees. That is subject to collective bargaining.
I have a question. How would we do what you just recommended at the beginning of it? What type of motion would that be? Because it isn't one of the ones that's up there.
Right. In my opinion, if council is inclined to, say, remove a cap, one thing you could do is have a motion, are we inclined to do that? And if so, give direction to your city manager and staff to come back to you with that information so that you could consider it to have a vote on removing a cap. You could give direction and advisability to obtain that information.
Before we remove the cap or after we remove the cap?
It would make before to assist you in making your decision on removing the cap or adjusting a cap or suspending a cap. I'm just suggesting rather than I've heard conversations about arbitrary and acting without studies. I would agree. I think it's important to have studies, understand the financial impacts as stewards of the money and understand the impact it's going to have on the city as a whole in the future when you make that decision. Whatever that decision is, I can't tell you what decision to make. My advice is you obtain the studies and understand the financial impacts as you move forward.
Okay. Member Nelson?
I don't have a problem with what Mr. Broom is suggesting with a study so that we have an idea of what the financial impact would be. However, I look at this as a question of fairness. I'm violating the microphone rule. I look at this as a question of fairness. And if these people or some of these people have retired in reliance on not having a cap, having insurance, and then retroactively we take it away from them, to me that's unfair. And they have no voice. You know, we come in as a city, I'm going to say we because we're responsible, and we say, we decided that A, B, and C are going to happen to you, and we're up here, and I agree with Mr. Behringer, we're up here to make sure that you guys are treated fairly. So if promises were made, and you know, we do need to know what the financial impact is, but if promises were made and they acted in reliance on those promises, it's almost like a contract.
Vice Mayor?
And thank you, Mayor, and I appreciate that. So, and City Attorney, I appreciate the pragmatism. And I think that some of those questions that we're going to get back as far as from a policy standpoint, I think that we have data to give us the inclination of how this is going to work out. And here's why I say that. Because from 15 to 18, 7 million, right? Expense, 7 million. And there's 2 million that were up and down in gains and losses. And even if you put a 24% rise in healthcare costs, right? I mean, it's absurd, but that's that is a reality right now. So I go, okay, 24%, 18%, take your pick, right? And then you look at how much is that going to impact our folks over here? They're going to eat more costs. That's going to happen. And every couple of years, we're going to have a couple catastrophics in there. And I think it is cyclical. And I think that just like when we went through, and here's where I go lesson learned, is that in the same way as a city, we contracted to make sure fiscally we would survive. I think that the contraction was too much. And instead of looking at this as a 25-year, how do we handle healthcare, we looked at it as solely in the lens of a view of 1 year. And I think that in a decision-making process as a council, I think that we have to take I think that we do have to take a broader look than just the single year in front of us, because our employees gave us a much longer view in return. And so I'm comfortable with the data that we have, although I would strongly suggest, just like anything else, if we're going to make a financial decision, I think the policy is that we remove it. I think that we're in the ballpark on what is it going to take, and I think that we can do it. And so as such, here's at least my motion. My motion would be to remove the $500 cap for employees hired before 10/1/2003 and who retired before 4/4/2014. That would be inclusive of the 165 Medicare eligible, that's the 88 non-Medicare, and the 15 all non-Medicare eligible from that second group. And that would be my motion.
I have a motion and a second. Further discussion. Does anybody want to say anything? I do. I just wish we could spend more time on finding out what we are looking at, because I don't think it's as simple as what others may think it is. And again, I mean, just what we've seen in the past few years on Obamacare and now this new thing, nobody knows where it's going. And it could be drastically more and could actually, I'll say, bankrupt the city. We're talking about big dollars, $7 million. I heard you a couple of weeks ago say like $35,000 is a lot of money. $7 million is a lot more than that, right? It's real money too, and it's coming out of everybody's pocket. So I would like to know more, but that's the motion. It's the motion.
I'd like to respond to that.
Yes.
And when I said, for the rescinding, for the being fair, for the process, for where'd this come from? I know we had a tough time. We got to do it, and now we're going through a prosperous time. There should be some shift for that. But I also asked the question: how often do we readdress this? So, as far as the bankrupting the city, that's obviously the last thing we want to do. And I think that anybody who knows me, when I can possibly say the word private sector spending away from city spending, I do. When I can say, that's fluff. That's fluff. We need stuff. We don't want to spend money on things we don't need. This one hits me pretty seriously, and this is one that I think was one way, got changed to another, and for that reason and the fact that I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, we readdress this next year, and if it somehow was not working and it was a much bigger deal than we thought it was going to be, then I would say to the same people that I'm wanting to speak for tonight that we may have to readdress it next year. But right now, I think we have the numbers. We have the safety net of saying we can readdress it next year. I'm for the rescinding, and I would stand by the second.
Anyone else?
Yeah. So,
I'm sorry. Member Stokely,
yes.
That was your light, wasn't it?
Now, if we do rescind the cap, what would be the process for putting it back on? Worst case scenario, if this blows up in our face and we realize, well, we're in debt for some strange reason, what would be that process? I guess I would, from staff, clarification on that.
We'd be involved in it at that time.
Bill?
You would have
Nobody
meetings,
from the audience,
as we
please.
have for the last couple of years. My understanding is we've set notices for retirees to come here and have meetings with staff to explore options, come to you as we did now. You would go through that process. I would just caution you, say you're removing the cap, but you're treating it as if it's an annual review. In my opinion, it's different if you say we're suspending the cap this year, we're going to have to look at our budget next year, but you're not saying that. What I understand, you're saying we're getting rid of the cap. But you're treating it as if you're suspending it this year and looking at it next year. It's a little
Well, if you're addressing me, I'd like to rebut that by saying that I asked them if we readdress this. They said, yes, we do.
We look at insurance every year.
Okay, I get that. But if we were able to do away and rescind the cap this year, what would keep us from putting it back on next year?
in my opinion, it'd be a challenge because you've now told them you've removed the cap, and you're going to hear the same thing you promised. You're going to hear the same thing every year.
You still have the floor. Go ahead.
I do, or?
You do. You do. Well, I guess Member Stokel still, she was the last speaker. So do you have anything else?
Yeah. No, I'm definitely, like, I can see it's 56,000. I feel comfortable if that's what it was going to be. It makes me a little nervous because I think we're looking at 17 years of this roughly, of continuing on as people phase into Medicare. The health insurance, in a nutshell, what's happening with different administrations, I would have never guessed we'd be at this point right now. So it just makes me a little nervous as we're trying to be fiscally responsible with tax dollars, just to say, hey, let's just remove it. If I feel comfortable and confident that if we were to remove it and should something happen, we could put it back on safely, that's fine. I just want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence with taxpayer dollars to say, and at the same time, taking care of our retirees that did work for us, that did risk their lives. Like, there's something to be said for that, whether it was a promise, whether it was an expectation, if they felt, that's what they were going to get. I just don't think that any of us thought we would be in this situation where, health insurance is going up so much. But I would like to have just a little bit more oversight over it and a little bit more control, just to make sure we're not putting the city with too much liability. That's just my opinion.
You could make an amendment if you'd like to on that basis.
So we would, if I could, then yeah, I would like to go ahead and see if we can go ahead and pay that $56,000, whatever that amount is for this year. Not necessarily setting an expectation, but if the city is in a good situation next year, then to say, okay, if it did go up, maybe up to $590, and we are a good situation, let's look at that again. With the expectation that the retirees know, too, that we're trying to do the best with what money we have and be willing to work with us knowing that that's going to happen. But, I mean, $53 a month for right now, yeah, I think we could do. So that would be my amendment, and then we just, next year when we're back here again, see what that is. And if we can take care of them, let's take care of them.
So are you saying leave the cap or take off the cap?
I'm more inclined to the option 2, personally. I feel like keep the cap in place and review annually, and us go ahead and pay for the difference right now, the $53, so they won't have to pay for that this year.
So option 2 is your motion? Anybody? Second?
No. So, I'm sorry, I was looking for clarity on the motion, sir. Yeah.
I'm in the middle of a motion.
Sorry.
Would anybody second that motion? Will anybody second that motion? I'll pass the gavel to you, and I will second that motion. Who's next?
Me.
The motion is to keep the cap in place and review annually during the budget process to determine the impact of the policy to the retiree and the city.
Discussion.
And go ahead and pay for this year for them.
Yes.
Your number is up there next.
I'm up. Yes, I am. I would like to go ahead and get rid of the cap. If there is a problem, I would expect staff to come back to us and say, we have a problem. I was expecting retirees not to be happy, but if we run into a problem, that at that point we address it.
I'm open to that as well, knowing that we do have a policy in place to put the cap back on if needed.
Vice Mayor.
And I just want to make sure that I have clarity of the motion that's on the table. So currently what I hear is for the removal, the motion, as I understand it, the motion on the table is for the removal
Motion or the amendment?
Well, both. So the amendment to the motion that was made. The motion that was made was for the rescinding of the $500 cap for employees that started before and ended before 2014, with the amendment that we don't do that. That the amendment is that we do nothing and come back next year on the decision, which arbitrarily kills the motion that's on the floor. So it's piggybacking. It essentially piggybacks nothing except let's review it again next year.
Correct.
That's what I hear.
Procedurally, where you're at, you have a motion as stated to remove the cap for the Category 1, which was seconded. We then have a request to amend that motion, which I believe was seconded. So now we need to vote on whether to amend your motion. If that fails, your motion stands. If it passes, your motion stands as amended.
And for clarity in this voting, that if we vote no to this amendment, that it removes the amendment, leaving only the motion.
That's
Would that
correct.
be a correct statement. Okay.
And if it passes, it stands as amended.
Correct. Thank you.
So now we need to vote on the proposed amendment.
I'd like to hear clearly from you what your amendment was.
My amendment is for option 2, to keep the cap in place, review it annually, and for the city to go ahead and pay the difference this year for them, with the hope and expectation that as the city is in a good financial situation, as council sees fit, that we pick up that difference in cost. With the hope, honestly, as people phase into Medicare, that this is something that we can, as a council, do. I do believe that. That's my amendment.
Thank you. Member Berenger, your number is still there. Member Diesel, please, you have to come up here to talk, but right now we're past that stage and you can't shout from the audience. It's just not part of our procedure. I'm sorry.
All right, as I understand it, and I'm hearing a lot of that now, as I understand it, we had a motion, a second, to do away with the cap. And then noted that we could readdress that, and you may differ with me on that, but we meet every year on this issue. I would assume we can readdress it. And if need be, I would be willing to, where I'm speaking now, and then perhaps favorably, next year I would say, hey guys, this is where it was. I'm being as honest as I can. I would rather go with the optimistic aspect of we can rid ourselves of the cap and things will be moving along where we can maintain the fact that we don't need the cap, as opposed to going forward saying we'll waive it this year, but we're going to probably, we meant probably, but we're still going to have it. And I just as soon get rid of that for now. I want to get rid of the cap.
Call the question, sir.
Not yet. In answer to your question, I think in a perfect world that would be a great thing, but my experience, and it's not a bad thing. I mean, it's human nature that once something is given, just like you said at the beginning, it's real hard to get it to go away. So, understanding that. Anybody else that wants to speak? Not hearing anybody, we'll vote on the amendment. Everybody clear? That's option 2. All those in favor, say yes.
Yes.
Yes. All those opposed, same sign.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
3 no's, correct?
Or 3 no's.
It's 3 yeses to not do that. So that fails. We go back to the original motion, which was, if you will restate that.
Correct, sir. So the motion was for to rescind the cap for employees hired before 10/1/2003 and retiring before 4/4/2014. All of the 165 Medicare eligible, inclusive of the 88 non-Medicare. Excuse me. So employees hired before 10/1/2003, retiring before 4/4/2014, with total employees to be 253, 165 Medicare eligible, 88 non-Medicare, and the employees from 10/1/2003 retiring not normal retirement age before 4/4/2014, which is inclusive of 15 all non-Medicare eligible.
Okay. I hope everybody gets that. That's a lot of words. All those in favor of that, say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? I have to say, my conscience here is that I do not think this is a good idea, so I say yes to this motion, against this motion. So it's 4-1, I believe, right? Yeah. It's 4-1. The motion passes.